Episode 5 of The Rings of Power did something that pissed me off. Despite being a die-hard Tolkien fan, I've been quite tolerant of the various dumb and unnecessary changes that the show has made to the source material. But episode 5 crossed the line for me. Maja Govanen, I am Wojnik, and today I'm going to talk about Mithril, The Rings of Power, and the fading of the Elves. Spoiler alert for episode 5, and let's go. So, The Rings of Power told us that Mithril, the metal from which, for example, the chainmail of Bilbo and Frodo was made, originated from a Silmaril. According to a show legend, a noble elven warrior fought a Balrog over the jewel hidden in a tree, and when a lightning struck, the combined power traveled into the Misty Mountains and created the Mithril veins. Now, only the Mithril can prevent the elves from fading away in Middle-earth because it contains the light of the Silmaril. That is just a big pile of bull made up for the show. Here is what is based on Tolkien in this legend and what is made up. The elven warrior, pure of heart, is clearly inspired by Glorfindel, one of the mightiest Noldor elves in Middle-earth. Glorfindel fought a Balrog during the fall of Gondolin and sacrificed his life to protect the elves fleeing from the city. He didn't fight over a Silmaril or a tree, but still, the callback is obvious, even if meaningless. Glorfindel was given a new body in Valinor, as all elves eventually do, but very quickly because of his noble actions in life and pure heart. In the Second Age, Manwë, by way of exception, sent him to Middle-earth to aid Gil-galad and Elrond in the struggle against Sauron. It is possible that we might see actual Glorfindel in the show in future seasons. The light of the elven warrior is also a reference to Glorfindel. Tolkien's elves couldn't pour their light into stuff, that's nonsense. But they did describe their invisible soul as light. In the books, it's Glorfindel who saves Frodo from the Nazgul before Rivendell, not Arwen. When Frodo has been wounded by the Morgul blade, he was close to fading into the unseen, the spirit world. Thanks to this, he was able to see a white light shining through the form and raiment of Glorfindel, as if through a thin veil. The second thing the legend gets right is that one of the Silmarils indeed ended up in the depths of the earth. But literally. Maedhros, son of Fëanor, cast his Silmaril and himself into a fiery chasm in the earth because he couldn't bear the suffering inflicted by the jewel burning his unworthy hand. The other two Silmarils also ended up unreachable for the dwellers of Middle-earth. One was cast into the sea, and the other bound upon Earendil's forehead, traveling the sky with him on his ship until the end of times, shining bright like a star. By the way, in the Silmarillion, Earendil's wife, Elwing, didn't beg him not to sail to Valinor as Elrond in the show says. She sailed with him because she thought that her kidnapped children were beyond saving. But before all of that, none of the three Silmarils ever ended up hidden in a tree fought over by an elf and a Balrog. As a matter of fact, the history of the three jewels is probably the most well-documented history of the First Age, and it was well known by the elves. What we know as the Silmarillion, in the fictional context of Middle-earth, is assumed by many to be Tolkien's translation of a book written by Bilbo Baggins, which he in turn composed from the original source by Pengolod, an elven historian. So in the book context, it's theoretically impossible for such a legend to be even believed in by the elves. Now, what the legend gets completely wrong is Mithril. Mithril in the books is just a really good metal. There is nothing inherently magical about it. It's immensely strong and yet very lightweight, and for that reason, it was highly prized. But it doesn't shine with its own light, it's just very shiny in a reflective way, even for metal. And most importantly, it didn't originate from the combined power of elven light, Balrog's hatred and lightning-fueled Silmaril. Mithril was a natural occurrence, found mainly in the dwarven mines of the Misty Mountains, but also on Numenor, and possibly in Aman as well. Everyone desired it back in the day when it was still mined, and the elves loved it for its beauty. But it had no connection whatsoever to the Silmarils and wasn't vital to the elves. It was just metal. Only one ring of power is known to be made out of Mithril, Nenya, the ring of Galadriel. But Mithril wasn't what gave it its powers. It could have been made from any other metal, and it should have made no difference whatsoever. Finally, we gotta talk about the elves fading from the world. In the books, it's not elven spirit or light that fades, but the body. For the elves living in Middle-earth, as the ages pass, their soul slowly overpowers and consumes the body. Eventually, they fade, become as spirits, invisible to mortal eyes, with their body absorbed by their soul. That is because Middle-earth is forever tainted by Morgoth's corruption of the world, which causes the accelerated fading of the elven bodies. Meanwhile, in Aman, the Valar actively preserved their land free of Morgoth's corruption. Thus, in the Blessed Realm, the elven spirits didn't consume their bodies, both aged apace, and would not fade until the end of times, when the elves will disappear with the whole Arda, the world they are forever bound to, unlike humans. Moreover, the fading in Middle-earth was no secret known only by few. It was a common knowledge among the elves, who have realized that as early as the First Age. Finrod, brother of Galadriel, foreboded it in year 409 First Age, in his debate with Andred, a mortal woman. Already at that point, the elves have anticipated the fading and made no secret out of it. They didn't actively seek to prevent it either. They simply accepted that one day their time will come and they will have to either leave Middle-earth or fade, and make way for the dominion of men. Also, in the Second Age, there was no need for seeking the ways to prevent fading. The elves remaining in Middle-earth only began to fade in the Fourth Age, after the final defeat of Sauron. It was no imminent danger in the Second Age. That's just another bullshit of the show to raise the stakes. Now, was it still possible to delay the fading in Middle-earth? That's actually debatable. I've spent a whole day researching and asking my fellow Tolkien experts about it, and came to the conclusion that if it was possible, only the Rings of Power would allow it. The Silmarils did hold the light of the two trees, but they didn't have the power to prevent the effects of Morgoth's corruption of the world. Same would apply to the only thing in the books that held the light of a Silmaril. Not Mithril, but the water from Galadriel's fountain. That water held the light of Earendil's star and was given to Frodo in a phial. Now, when it comes to the Rings of Power, their main purpose was to preserve elven domains from decay and change in time. The ultimate official goal that Sauron, in Annatar's disguise, promised to the elves was to transform the whole Middle-earth to be as beautiful and forever lasting as Valinor itself. Of course, Annatar deceived the smiths of Eregion, and the secret purpose of the 16 rings forged with his help was to dominate and control the elves. Only the 3 rings, forged by Celebrimbor, without Sauron's contribution, were truly directed to the preservation of beauty and not domination. But they were still tied to the One Ring, because they were still made using his techniques. Only after Sauron was defeated at the end of the Second Age, and the One Ring was lost, the 3 could have been used safely. Throughout the Third Age, Elrond and Galadriel used them to preserve Rivendell and Lorien respectively, and guard them from evil, while Círdan eventually gave his ring to Gandalf, to help him inspire hope and courage in others. After the One Ring has been destroyed, all Rings of Power lost their power, the 3 included. Now, when they were still active, did the 3 also help in preserving the elves themselves from fading? Well, it seemingly wasn't needed in the Third Age, as the elves who weren't under the influence of the rings didn't fade then. For example, the Mirkwood elves. Círdan also didn't fade after giving his ring away, even though he was the oldest known elf living in Middle-earth. But then, could the rings prevent the fading in the Fourth Age, if the One Ring hypothetically wasn't destroyed but remained lost outside of Sauron's grasp, and the three kept their power? We can't know that for sure. The elves talk a lot about their kingdoms fading after their rings lost their power, but there are multiple meanings behind fading. The first one, the metaphorical fading of the world, is understood simply as the passage of time and the decay that comes with it. We know that Galadriel and Elrond used the rings to significantly slow the passage of time in their kingdoms, as noted by Bilbo and Frodo in the books. The second one was the half-metaphorical, half-literal waning of their kingdoms, the decay of their beauty and magic. As stated by Galadriel, with the destruction of the One Ring, their power was diminished, Lothlorien would fade, and the tides of time would eventually sweep it away. So the rings prevented or delayed that. The final meaning is the literal fading of the elven bodies. Galadriel and Elrond talk about how when the One Ring is destroyed, all beautiful things will fade and the elves will dwindle. Are they talking about their bodies? Does it mean the rings could have protected them from fading? It's all unclear. The accelerated fading was a consequence of Morgoth's taint on the world. We don't know to what extent the three rings could reduce the corruption. They were not actually able to perfectly simulate Valinor's conditions in Middle-earth. Legolas confirms that by saying that the passage of time in Lorien isn't stopped, but merely slowed down. Does it mean the rings could at the very least significantly slow down the fading of elven bodies? We can't be sure. But it seems that in the show, they will be able to. We know from the leaks that by the end of Season 1, Celebrimbor will forge the first Ring of Power. No doubt, it will be forged from Mithril, and its main purpose will actually be to prevent or delay the literal fading of the elves, since that's his main goal as revealed in Episode 5. We don't know whether it will be one of the Great Rings or a lesser ring, but probably the latter. Annatar is yet to be introduced, so unless he already is in Eregion without our knowledge, the forged ring won't be one of the 19, cause all of them were forged at least using Sauron's technique and lore. Of course it's possible that Annatar has been teaching Celebrimbor all along, off-screen, and his reveal will be the final twist of the season. But if not, then the ring forged in this season will be but a prototype, and one that can't fully work from the storytelling standpoint. Cause if it was enough to prevent its bearer from fading, the elves wouldn't need Annatar's help in the future. So there must be something wrong with this first ring. Either the light of the Mithril won't be enough to power up the elves. Gosh, that's so stupid. Or the legend of the Mithril's origin is simply untrue. It is a possibility. Elrond says that it's an obscure legend, regarded by most to be apocryphal. And maybe that's what it is. Just a legend that Gil-galad and Celebrimbor believe in mistakenly or know to be fake, but still use it to deceive Elrond and the dwarves. Or maybe it's Annatar who is deceiving everyone. Or maybe there is a grain of truth in it. Maybe in the show, the elves don't know what exactly happened with Maedhros and his Silmaril, and made up this heroic legend that covers up the ugly truth. And Mithril just coincidentally happens to fit in with the made-up story. Whatever the case, it's very much a possibility that the legend isn't entirely true. As stated by the director of Episode 5, part of the season is the exploration as to whether the legend is true or not. So the show still has a chance to redeem its worst, if you ask me, change. It's just a matter of time to see whether they take this chance. Namarie.